Hello, everybody. Today is Wednesday, July 25th, and we're bringing you Block Digest 116 at block height 533,635. So what's going on today, Rick?
Man, it has been kind of a hectic day, a little bit here and there, but we are here, man, to talk about what's going on in Bitcoin. So let's do it. How you doing today?
Bitcoin. Bitcoin. I thought this was a shitcoin show.
Oh
What,
no,
weren't we going to talk about EOS and how it's going to solve all the world's problems once Antpool takes over?
Shinobi, this is a shitcoin show. We shit on coins. Other coins.
she got it right, yeah, because Bitcoin is up there, man. Bitcoin's the talk of the town. These alts are hitting the ground.
Speaking
Nah,
of
man, that's just Blockstream Axacore trying to pump the price to scare all the real coin holders.
speaking of shitcoins, real quick, I didn't think it was worthy enough to have in the news desk, but there is apparently some kind of token now called Pooh, Pooh, and the website is number2.io. So that is there's literally a shitcoin.
Yeah, I knew that was going to happen. Somebody's going to do the number 2 poo coin.
Mm-hmm. All right. So today, gonna try and start doing something I mentioned. I think last episode I wanted to start doing covering the Bitcoin Optech newsletter real quick. So dive right into that. 0.16.2 release candidate 2 is out for testing. So if you find yourself a daring individual, you can go out there and compile that and give it a test run. As far as network fee levels, we have pretty low fee levels. So if you can wait around 12 blocks or so, now is a good time to get consolidations in, low priority transactions. And native SegWit activity in blocks has been increasing, but dropped about 80%. And Optech is pretty much thinking this is just due to a heavy consolidation move by an exchange or something finishing. But SegWit use is around 40% right now, and there's no serious fallback in that percentage. So rundown. Obviously, as we talked last episode, Optech was publicly announced. They had their first workshop in San Francisco, and that went pretty well according to everything. There's going to be no RPC change in Bitcoin Core for coin selection metrics, like kind of querying the node and getting back a little info about things. And pretty much the reason is some people at the workshop and some developers, including Greg Maxwell, didn't want to have to worry about the RPC format for that, kind of messing with coin selection that could affect privacy features, and didn't want things breaking the RPC interface. So they're pretty much not going to do that. Peter Woolley has opened a pull request for a script descriptor, which would pretty much allow you to scan the UTXO set for things based on output scripts. So that's something that should be making it into 0.17 so that you can just kind of scan the UTXO set for outputs and not have to worry about going back through the whole chain. And BIP 174 for partially signed Bitcoin transactions has been merged into Core. So a couple notable merges. There is a new update as far as watch-only wallets to kind of make things a little simpler for importing wallets into Core without putting the private keys in there. The scan transaction outset RPC is coming along. So again, like I just mentioned, you can just grab your outputs directly from the UTXO set. Bitcoin QT is now by default bundled with 32-bit ARM binaries. 64-bit ARM should be coming soon. There is going to be a change to transaction relay policies. Previously, it would kind of randomize when it relayed transactions differently for each peer. and it's going to start blasting them out all at the same time. And the reasoning is pretty much so that people connecting to your node with multiple spy nodes won't be able to get any advantage from multiple spy nodes, since everything's going out to everyone at the same time. And hopefully in the long term, this will wind up with less bandwidth being wasted for publicly accessible nodes, because there's no point to really try and connect with multiple spy nodes at that point. And abandoned transaction RPC has been fixed. Previously, when you attempted to abandon a transaction, it would only abandon the first child transaction. And now it's going to abandon every descendant from that. So there's going to be no more issues as far as trying to abandon a transaction in your wallet and resubmit a new one to the network. And so that is the quick rundown of the Optech newsletter.
Yeah, man, those things are going to be interesting just to kind of keep up to date with all the different things going on GitHub. Because you know how it is. It's like there's this going on here, over there, over here. And yeah, it's always kind of difficult to dig through all those threads and everything and see what's going on. It's an interesting way to keep things, everybody updated with what's going on.
It was really funny because when this latest newsletter, when I saw it in my Twitter timeline, it was I think it was Michael Goldstein tweeting it out. He was like tweeting out, I think, 3 different newsletters that were all very tech related. And right below that tweet was one from Cobra saying, I'm so annoyed with all these Bitcoin people. All they talk about these days is the price, eating meat, and something else, shitting on other coins, which I thought was hilarious because the tweet right above him was like a Bitcoin carnivore tweeting only about tech stuff and not the price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cobra needs to shut the fuck up. He contradicts himself every 5 seconds and is gone in the span of a couple months now, from Bitmain is the devil, we must kill Bitmain, to everybody support Bitmain's fork of Bcash. I don't think he has an understanding of what logic or consistency is.
Yeah, it's it's pretty interesting seeing that whole discussion there about the Bcash fork and people taking sides and stuff. That's funny, man. Yeah, I can already. We were talking earlier. I could see Craig Wright's ticker going to be the BCSW. Everybody's going to be like Craig Wright.
All right, though. Dive into the first story, I guess. So pretty much, Nopara a couple days ago was kind of tweeting about Schnorr signatures and kind of how that related to quantum computing and vulnerabilities that quantum computers potentially could imply for things like Bitcoin. And so I kind of wanted to break down really how that works, as far as things like Schnorr versus things like confidential transactions, and then look at a potential upgrade path that's been proposed by Tim Ruffing. And if I remember correctly, he's one of the developers for CoinShuffle, a CoinJoin implementation. And so really when you look at like a quantum computer, like it kind of breaking things roughly into like a normal public-private key and transaction and something like confidential transactions, it's kind of 2 different threats there, really. When you're dealing with confidential transactions, the risk is the range proof. And because of how that works, it creates the potential to literally print coins out of thin air. And so pretty much the range proof is like a cryptographic proof that allows you to show that the outputs are not exceeding the amount of the inputs without actually making either of those amounts visible. And if you can break that, then it would pretty much allow you to just print Bitcoins out of thin air. And Nopara has kind of talked potentially about a way to deal with that, at least protecting the overall coin supply. Pretty much by having like a little extension block, kind of sort of, that would just keep track of the total amount of Bitcoins that have moved into confidential transaction outputs. And see, my issue with this is, like, yes, it would protect the total coin supply as far as the whole network is concerned, but in that case, I think it would really disincentivize any like real like material amount of people from ever using CT, because if range proofs were ever broken by something like a quantum computer after that point, somebody could just instantaneously withdraw into a non-CT transaction all of the Bitcoins that have moved into CT outputs, and then everybody who has their coins in CT is fucked. And pretty much like you're not going to find out about that until somebody does it, at which point everybody's coins that have moved into CT outputs is just destroyed. And so I like, again, like I said, this kind of protects it at a system level as far as the coin supply. But I think the trade-off involved there in not allowing inflation is just a huge disincentive to never use CT, because you're effectively putting all your coins in a betting pool that won't happen. And if it does happen, everybody who's done it is fucked. And when you're kind of dealing with like a normal non-CT transaction, the threat really is not there until you've actually exposed your raw public key. And so this is more of an issue with like Satoshi's rumored coins, or like really old lost coins that existed before we started doing the pay to public key hash and actually hashing the public key in the output instead of just directly having the public key. And so like we would see this immediately happen as like large amounts of old lost coins or unmoved coins started moving rapidly, and it would kind of give everybody a heads up. But the issue with that is, from that point on, once you've seen that happen, it's not really safe to move your coins at that point or transact, because in transacting you have to reveal your public key in the input to compare the signature against. And so there's the potential of somebody cracking your private key from the public key and double spending you. There's the potential that miners might actually try to reorg the chain if it takes longer to find your private key from the public key to steal the money back, because like once they have that key, if they reorg back, they can steal your funds as well. And so this is kind of always like worried a lot of people, and the potential that like once we see that happen, it's kind of like, what the fuck do you do? Well, Tim Ruffing's idea, I think it pretty much completely like solves this problem. And the whole idea is, what you would do is you would take a transaction that is encrypted to your public key and then have that mined in a block, and then have some kind of waiting period where like after so many blocks pass, you then dump what's needed to decrypt it. Like things have moved on so far in the blockchain that it's not practical to reorg back past that. And then at that point, the earliest of these encrypted transactions would be the one considered valid. And so this way you could kind of use this method as a way to move non-quantum safe coins into a new key or address scheme that would be quantum safe, without the potential that somebody could crack your private key and double spend you, or that miners could go back and reorg the chain to double spend things. And so I just kind of wanted to put this out there because I saw a decent number of people kind of throwing around, you know, threat analysis and kind of boogeymanning like how dangerous quantum computers can be for like things like Bitcoin. And I think really at the end of the day, like this would be a thing where there would be unilateral support for a hard fork if it was necessary. Like everybody's money would be at risk here. And like there's no rational reason to not go along with a fork to address this issue. And Tim Ruffing's proposal is pretty much worked out completely, like how to actually handle this without the risk of coins being stolen in the process. So it's just pretty much like, you know, this is a long-term problem here, but we pretty much have the way to address it already worked out. And it just comes down to the fact that when it happened, we would just have to stop using the network for a while until a fork was put together. And then this would over time address it as everybody migrated their coins.
Yeah, man, this is a great thing. Like just, seeing this constant development as far as working towards better privacy on Bitcoin and, just making sure that things are, we don't have these errors in as far as like giving up privacy and everything. Like this is just an awesome development. And yeah, it's awesome to just see all these different developments from, like Nopara and same thing the guys are doing with Samurai and CT. So, yeah, this is just it's great to see like all this stuff coming up because it's one of those things where I don't know. I guess it was just everybody was worried about SegWit for the longest time, so it was hard to see any of these developments. So it's great to see.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
Yeah.
it just goes to show like they've game theoried a lot of problems.
Yeah. And I just want to remind everyone that you don't really have to be worried about quantum computers right now because, like, they're not even close to having the right number of qubits that would be able to threaten Bitcoin. So you really don't have to, unless there's like a massive unexpected, development, which is probably unlikely. You probably don't have to even think about this kind of stuff for another 15 years or so at the very least. So don't be too worried about it.
Yeah, that whole I don't know. Everybody wants to think that whole I don't know, AI and all these things are just like quantum computing. It's like right around the corner, but it does feel like there's a little bit more work to be done there. It is good to see, the guys like really gaming it out though, even though it's still, average person though, stop, don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm. Then I guess in other news, a pull request that looks like it's going to make it into 0.17 regarding coin selection. And pretty much what this is going to try to do is, and it's pretty much going to try and make a little less optimal trade-offs in terms of fees when doing coin selection for a little bit of a benefit in privacy. And pretty much like what it's going to do is going to look at destination groups, or in other words, groups of outputs that have all been sent to the same public key or address. And pretty much if it's going to select a output from an address, what it's going to do is up to a point, it will grab all of the outputs that have ever been sent to that address and spend them all at once. Like even if it is in excess of what's needed for the actual payment, and kind of dump them off to a single change address. And the reason for doing this is, like, let's say for instance you have like 3 different outputs in a single address, but you only need one of them to really make your payment. So what that would do is it would take that coin, it would spend it, it would send the change back to a new address. And then let's say in the future you have a payment you need to make, and it's going to select one of those other outputs from the same address, but mix it with one from another address. It's pretty much, it's leaking more privacy information and kind of tying your outputs together when you otherwise wouldn't need to. And so they're going to be implementing this new aspect of coin selection to kind of try and make a default of a little better privacy-centric kind of thinking as far as what coins are being selected when a transaction is generated. And I'm sure some people right now watching are thinking, what about addresses peppered with dust? They're going to be implementing a limit on the kind of grouping that it looks at. And I think right now what they were discussing is around 10, but pretty much it's going to filter out outputs that are uneconomical to spend, like outputs that would cost more in fees to include than it's actually worth. And to a point, just in general, filter out excessive amounts of outputs so that this doesn't lead to like insanely high fees just to get this privacy benefit. But, this is I just kind of wanted to talk about this because this is like it really goes to show like the really simple, nuanced things that can really make a material improvement as far as your privacy and transacting on chain. You know, like a lot of people out there are just kind of staring at things like, you know, ZK snarks or confidential transactions as like the thing that will fix it all. And not really thinking about like all of the little things that you can do without even touching the protocol itself that kind of cumulatively just build up to better and better privacy as far as your coins leaking metadata on the chain. And it's just, you know, personally, I'm hopeful that even if we never get confidential transactions due to the potential of inflation attacks if the range proofs are broken, that we can pretty much get all the privacy we need just by thinking smart and incrementally with all the little non-protocol improvements that we can build out.
Yeah, honestly, like there in my first statement, I thought we were talking about this wrapped up in the other story because this was a the privacy development that I was really excited about whenever I was seeing the way that these outputs were going to be sent to a certain address, and then I guess the way that it moves these outputs is just make sure that you're not sending it to the same address, and to try and keep it separated as far as like what coins have been AML'd and which ones haven't in our KYC. And yeah, that's just interesting to see that sort of development coming down the line. Like you're saying, there's all these other things as far as that helps privacy that, CT, like we're saying, I mean, there's a chance that we might have trouble with that later on down the line. So it's good to see all these little developments that help along the way.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know, you want to take us into the series of somewhat optimistic outputs, updates, do you mean?
Yeah, man, these things sound good.
Yeah, so the first one is an update to what I talked about in the last show, which was the status of Julian Assange's Asylum. And at that point, it looked pretty grim because there were reports that the president of Ecuador, Moreno, had come to the UK. At least one of his objectives was to speak with British authorities in order to broker some kind of agreement as to how they would end his asylum and turn him over to British authorities. It turns out that that may not be as sudden of a development, at the very least, because they put out a statement. I linked to the Spanish language version there, but there's also an English language version that you can read. They translated that as well, and this was 2 days ago. They put out a statement saying that no, that was not the purpose of his trip. It wasn't. I mean, obviously they could be lying in all of this, and he could have actually met with UK authorities and discussed it. But at the very least, they are saying that that was not the main purpose of his trip, and also that they have not come to any kind of agreement or any plan of what they're going to do, because they say, like I quoted in the tweet, at the moment, given the complexity of the issue, there is no short or long-term solution in sight, which, again, they could be lying, but to me, it just feels unlikely that they're at least going to be doing anything drastic as kicking him out of the embassy in the next few weeks or so, which is what we were thinking, just a few days ago. There have been reports, though, and videos of staff carrying boxes of unknown objects out of the embassy, which could be furniture, it could be paperwork, we have no idea. But it's just been noticed that it's kind of suspicious that they're carrying boxes of things and putting into moving trucks. We have no idea what that's for. Possible theories about who or what could be in the boxes, maybe. But yeah, so it doesn't look like the situation is as dire, though I will say that definitely there are still a bunch of people that are basically hanging out in front of the embassy 24/7 to make sure that, they don't try to sneak him out without it being noticed. So, or at least sneak him out and give him over to the UK, not sneak him out in order to get him to safety, which would be okay with everyone, I think. But yeah, so this is a slightly better development in that case from what we were talking about in the last show.
Yeah, it was really good to hear that, sometimes it's just like the thing, like as far as just like the meeting not coming together, it's like one of those things where whenever I first heard it, I was like, oh, what does that leave? And then the real thing is it doesn't put him out of the embassy yet. And so that's a good thing, a good development. And hopefully, they can continue this diplomacy to try and get him somewhere where, everybody's happy. But yeah, I guess they should be checking those boxes on the way out. Maybe they squeezed him in one. But yeah, good thing for Julie.
That would be, I don't know, pretty uncomfortable, but I think it would be worth it. But I don't know. I think the most likely explanation, at least from my perspective, is just Ecuador is really double thinking the kind of damage that could potentially do to their reputation internationally. But I don't know. Probably much more familiar with the situation than me, Janine.
Yeah, I'm glitching out,
But,
so I hope that my audio isn't messed up right now. But I just want to remind everyone of this post that was written by Craig Murray in 2012, where, because we're talking about WikiLeaks and how they may be participating in manipulating elections. I just want to remind everyone that this was written in 2012, and all the way back then, if you just do a term search for $87 million, the United States has put a lot of money into, shall we call it, campaigning help for Ecuadorian elections. So they had apparently the Pentagon was funding influencing of the Ecuadorian elections to the tune of $87 million back in 2012. So imagine how much that budget has probably increased since then. So just keep in mind, again, another instance of the U.S. being perfectly fine with screwing with other people's elections in order to get their own geopolitical goals met.
But we can't have that being done to us if it was, Janine. We're special. We're the world police. We're the new Roman Empire.
Yes, and I just want to remind everyone that at some point the Roman Empire came to an end because it got too large.
Yeah, but that whole fall was just like, yeah, it's hard to point to like one single thing that did it, and everybody's like, oh, well, when did it, and all this stuff. So, yeah, it's kind of confusing.
At the end of the day, though, the people just went back to the land, started farming, and life went on.
Yeah, I mean, it was really just like a whimper fault, right? I don't know. That's it's one of those parts of history where it's really hard to get I guess we could sort of go on the economics of Roman Empire and all that sort of stuff, but this isn't a history class. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and for anyone who would be interested in participating in any of the vigils that are going on at various cities around the world, I believe there is one coming up in DC very soon. There's also going to be one in sometime at the beginning of August, right in front of the Ecuadorian embassy, like an official scheduled vigil, not just the 24-hour one that's pretty much been going on for the past week or so. If you want to find out if there's any vigils near you, you can check out the WikiLeaks Twitter account, or there's also a campaign called Unity 4J, Unity, the number 4J, and they are sharing information about vigils that are going on. So
just leave your cell phones at home, people. They stingray the shit out of
notifications. Don't bring any devices if you can avoid it.
Good point.
Mm-hmm. All right, though, you ready for the next one?
Yes, again, more optimistic news that we were not expecting. So we basically found out again 2 days ago. Great things were announced on the 23rd of July, apparently, that there has been an indictment ever since the trial of Ross Ulbricht, which was not part of his sentencing, but was still, being investigated and such. And that was the murder for hire charges, which were used to prejudice the jury, but not actually charged and sentenced in his actual trial. But that indictment has still been open. And there has now been a motion from, I believe, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland to close it. Now, of course, it's entirely possible that the motion to drop those charges and the indictment could be denied, possible, but it's highly unlikely because it's not coming from, any random lawyer or the defense. It's coming from the U.S. Attorney's Office. And part of the reason is probably because the murder for hire charges, as we have, if you've been paying attention to this case and read any of the most unbiased, as far as I can tell, they will have told you by now that the two agents, one was from the DEA, and I don't know, I can't remember what their positions. One of them might have been FBI. There was also DEA and Secret Service. I don't know if they were all the same. Hard to keep track. But anyway, the two agents who were leading the investigation against Ross Ulbricht, they actually fabricated a bunch of evidence. And one of the things they fabricated was the murder for hire stuff. And so now the government has finally realized, well, we've put these two guys in prison now because they really screwed up our investigation. We should probably not pretend that that was legitimate evidence. And so now apparently the U.S. Attorney's Office has moved to dismiss that indictment, which means there was no murder for hire charges. So that is pretty good, because even though the U.S. Supreme Court denied their appeal, it's still possible that maybe his sentencing could be shortened, or I don't know what the next step is. There's currently a petition to get Ross Ulbricht pardoned, or at least clemency. So I don't know if that's their only option. But definitely the fact that now those murder for hire charges are gone or close to being gone, that's going to be a good sign for possibly shortening a sentence to something more reasonable, or at least getting him pardoned. Reasonable in terms of the drug war kind of reasonable, but
yeah, it's just great to see a positive development in this case, because for the longest time we've kind of just been looking at it real bleak, because we know what he's up against as far as trying to make an example of something. Whenever these guys are in charge, they want to just keep, they just want to push their thumb down as hard as they can. So to see it even come up a little bit, and see these murder for hire charges possibly get dropped there, it's an amazing thing. And it just, it kind of leaves the door open to the possibility of the Senate's getting lightened, and just also shows that they are behind the scenes still looking at it, and not just blocking the door and throwing away the key. That I know that's whenever you're behind those doors, I know that he put out a tweet just yesterday saying that he got a bunch of replies in from because I guess if you're replying to his tweets, they'll print them up and give it to him. And just to see that, and to get that, because you're in there for years, you don't know if that support's there. You don't. You hear it secondhand. So to see it, I'm sure, is a good thing, and to see this, I'm sure, is also a good thing. It just it sounds like there's positive developments surrounding this Ross Ulbricht case. So it's really a different turn from the way that we've been looking at it. So that's where it just gives me a bunch of high hopes as far as the future with this case, and the possibility of getting him out of there maybe before we have the Bitcoin revolution, and he could be a part of it with us. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. So I want to point out two things relating to, the absolutely horrible media coverage that has been happening. One of them is that there was a book, I believe it was published sometime last year, by Nick Bilton. And if you go to the Amazon page for his book and read the summary, he basically presents the murder for hire charges in a way that they are solidified, there was evidence, and he was sentenced. Like that was part of his trial. He doesn't mention the prejudice that they created, or the fact that he wasn't actually officially charged with them, that there was just this lingering indictment. So yeah, definitely, anyone who read this book and it prejudiced your opinion, you should probably tell Nick Bilton, fix his trash novel and get it revised, because like, sorry buddy, it's only a year old, but that's what happens when you don't do your research thoroughly enough and you contribute to someone's trial being prejudiced, and you convince a bunch of people, for example Brianna Wu, apparently, who had the gall to tweet at Ross Ulbricht's account that was set up in a similar way to how Chelsea Manning's Twitter account was initially set up as well, where someone was relaying, what he was saying, and she was saying over the phone. So yeah, Brianna Wu has apparently taken Nick Bilton's phrase, which is kingpin, drug kingpin, and saying that he should stay in prison for the rest of his days because he commissioned 3 murders through biker gangs and allowed organs to be trafficked and directly led to countless deaths. Which is funny because like her second tweet in the thread says something about how libertarianism is about personal responsibility and therefore he should be paying his tab, which is really a weird interpretation of what personal responsibility and libertarianism means, because as far as I understand it, that would be an argument for why he shouldn't have been convicted, because he was just running a website and people are people and they will buy things and they will try to get it any way possible. And one of those ways was through the Silk Road, but all of them are ultimately responsible for what they put into their own bodies. So that would be the argument for personal responsibility. But for some reason, she's interpreted as he is responsible for everyone else's personal choices. Very confusing argument. So yeah, anyone who has contact with Nick Bilton or just wants to, really urge him to fix his book. It's apparently one of the most popular ones about Russell Ulbricht, which is really unfortunate. He should definitely fix it, because the charges are now not even charges, or they won't be soon, because there was no evidence.
Sure, it makes me think, like, could he be held like liable for libel? Like, just like maybe this, the campaign to free Ross could open a counter, like a suit against him for publishing that without any real evidence.
I mean, to be honest, I don't think that would get that far, because even if we do get to the point where Ross Ulbricht is either pardoned or given clemency or some kind of deal that shortens his prison sentence, I doubt that the government would be sympathetic to anyone trying to like point out the, blatant disregard for, the fact that this was someone's life that they had in their hands and they just threw it away for clicks and likes. So I doubt that would happen, but nothing would make me happier than to see a lawsuit against all of these journalists who, had such a lack of humanity and compassion, because it makes me angry.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's also just like we're saying, as far as the thumb that's pushing down on that case, it's like, they just allow these things to get published, and once they get published, it helps spread out the information, and that's one of those things where if there was some sort of pushback, but yeah, like the days of accountability that we're living in is just not. I'm sure the money would be much better spent just doing what it's doing. So, yeah, but it's not very smart as far as writing a novel about this situation and informing a bunch of people about it, and there's no evidence there. It's just a sign of the times, really, as far as like headlines being pushed out, just pushing people's opinions with headlines.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to point out is, especially if you're a U.S. person, there is a petition on, I think, change.org that is going around for Ross Ulbricht, arguing that he should be pardoned, because there is a lot of people recently, especially with drug-related nonviolent crimes, that have been pardoned because of, grandfather clauses and stuff. Or the absence of grandfather clause. I can't remember how the grandfather clause. It's people who are in prison because they committed what was considered a crime when they committed it, but then that law changed, and so they are allowed to, have their sentencing and charges reevaluated. But anyway, there's a change.org petition going around. I think it has 30,000 signatures already. Which is a lot. So, I mean, it's not a White House petition, which is, I assume, where they're going to go next with it. They really should have done a White House petition. But if you want to help out with that, then sign the petition, because maybe he'll have a chance to get pardoned by the orange monster.
Yeah.
Don't you shit talk God Emperor Trump.
I was
He
wondering
is
about the orange monster.
infallible. You will follow him like the Lord Jesus Christ himself.
Shinobi, I will bring such terror upon your house as you have never seen. I'm going to scream at it. I'm going to scream at you in the middle of the night about it. You're going to know. You're going to know when it comes, because I'll tweet at you in the middle of the night when no one's looking.
That bad, huh?
Oh, man. Yeah. All right. I guess we got one more from you, Janine. Would you like to explain why I'm not going to have to cancel my email service?
Feel the terror. Yeah. So people were a bit concerned because I think it was like the career section of ProtonMail's website, where they are listing positions that they want to hire people for. One of them was a blockchain developer. Now, you may be a little bit suspicious of that, considering it's an email service. What are they going to use blockchain for? Don't know. But when you scroll down through the job description, one of the preferred qualifications, in fact, is participated in a successful ICO, and then expert in developing secure Ethereum smart contracts. And yeah, those are two interesting things, because when you're basically trying to find someone who's participated in a successful ICO, first of all, you're not going to find anyone who has done that, because the only definition of successful ICO that we've seen so far is just blatant Ponzi schemes that do an exit scam after they take everyone's money. Hopefully that's not their definition of success. I don't think it is. But yeah, everyone was a bit freaked out by this, because they thought, oh, okay, ProtonMail is preparing to do an ICO. That's not good. So I believe it was Whale Panda and Lucas from the Swiss Bitcoin Association shared this on Twitter. And ProtonMail actually responded by sharing a statement that they posted to the ProtonMail subreddit. And they were saying that those unsubstantiated rumors of them doing an ICO are false, which is a good sign. That means I don't have to stop using them because they're doing a sketchy ICO. They do say in the statement that they believe there are ways in which blockchain can be leveraged to improve email security, and we are actively engaged in research in this area. Yeah, so I always find it interesting when like this, or projects or anything, say that blockchain can be leveraged to do this, because the funniest thing that because one of the origins of Bitcoin, or at least the things that went into Bitcoin, was proof of work, and that was developed by Adam Back, and he used proof of work for an email security thing, where he what was it called again? Damn it, I forgot the name. Hashcash. Yeah. So Adam Back created Hashcash, and that was a proof of work token in a way, where it would prevent email spam, because it would basically, if you're using Hashcash as part of your email service, then that meant that anyone that wanted to send an email to you, their computer, their CPU had to do a proof of work. It had to, go through that process and then send you the email, it wasn't a lot. But if you were someone who was spamming people and sending thousands of emails at once, that would be hard for you, because you'd have to generate a lot of proof of work, and that was just a waste of time for these spammers. So if ProtonMail was saying that they wanted to use proof of work for email security, that would make sense. I don't really see how a blockchain would make sense, though. Does anyone see a use case for blockchain and email?
I mean, a token as a 2FA, but I mean, at that point, why not just use the private key?
Or maybe a hardware device like YubiKey, maybe? That seems like a good second factor that doesn't need a token.
Yeah, it was kind of disappointing to see this out of ProtonMail, but I guess they kind of rolled back a little bit and said that this is not in their plans yet. So, but yeah, as far as blockchain and email, I mean, like the whole Hashcash thing was to stop spam, right? So, I mean, I guess you could try and make an email server that's spam resistant, and it's going to cost you to get a message or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I just don't see it. I mean, any rational argument you could make in my mind boils down to you have a private key to do something on a blockchain, and if you're integrating like a cryptographic key, just use the key. I mean, I really can't think of a single way you could leverage a blockchain for email except like maybe pay for it. And I mean, at that point, like, you should be looking into Lightning Network and Bitcoin, and you have no reason to be considering something like Ethereum or like potentially your own blockchain. Like, it's out there. Like, figure out how micropayments work.
Yeah, you build it on Ethereum. What's going to be a command line email server?
Yeah, and I would also love to know where they think they're going to get someone who's built a secure Ethereum contract. Does anyone know of any examples of secure Ethereum contracts that have not had any vulnerabilities found?
Nope. Can't think of a single one.
But yeah, I can't either.
Oh, right.
Suppose the ICO thing's doing the right thing as far as raising money, but it's not there's definitely some flaws there still.
Mm-hmm. All right, Rick, want to give us an update on Bitmain?
Yeah, man. Let's get out of the ICO talk and talk about IPO, right? So we discussed Bitmain. You know, they've been in talks about launching an IPO there in Hong Kong. So they finished another series of fundraising where they received $300 to $400 million, and now they're seeking another series of fundraising with a goal of $1 billion, which this is something new to me. I'm still kind of figuring out how IPOs work in the series of fundraisings and stuff. I mean, it's one of those things where when ICOs came out, I started researching it, and it's still something that I'm not fully aware of how these series and fundraisings work, but they seem to be one of their main investors in this previous round was, where did I put it? Sequoia Capital, Katu Management, and a Singapore state-run investment fund, EDBI. And, you know, I'm sure Bitmain is going to run through all these rounds of IPOs and then maybe ICO. You know, their name in the artwork is money green right now because it's just like they've talked about their revenue they raised last year with the price rise, and like we're saying, they just raised $300 to $400 million, and now they're going for $1 billion. But you know, this is all ahead of this possible IPO release, and they're trying to get this all put together by the end of this month to where they can start accepting this fundraising and get it complete to where they could submit their application for the Hong Kong Stock Exchange to try and be ready with their IPO release by the end of this year. But yeah, you know, it goes into just, yeah, they've also got this profit margins of 60%. And it's just, you know, it's just Bitmain raising money, continuing to get money, and get to a point where, I don't know, it's just, to me, I don't know. I guess this is like their position. Is they're a corporation and they're supposed to be doing these fundraising rounds, and then, you know, do the best they can for their shareholders and everything. But it does kind of keep raising this worry about how big they're becoming and, you know, what they could do with these funds. But like we've seen, they've been developing ASICs for other hashing algorithms, and we've seen competition come into the space and everything. So hopefully that competition can start building these more efficient Bitcoin miners, and we could really start to see that their lead is not really getting so far ahead. But the amount of fundraising here, as far as 300, 400 million just recently, going for another $1 billion, and then an IPO, and there's already been this discussion behind the scenes on the Bcash side as far as there being a Craig Wright fork and a Bitmain fork and what that's going to do. And it just, even though they're pretty much kind of like working their way out of Bitcoin mining, it's still a lot of money and a big company to keep an eye on as far as like what the heck they're doing and their plans. But for right now, yeah, they're trying to raise another $1 billion for their IPO. So that's where they stand.
And like, I think just like this trying to raise up their valuation is like, I think like it seems to me like what they're tactically doing here is just trying to raise their valuation with another like round before the IPO to be able to milk the IPO for absolutely as much as they can. And I mean, when you look at like a gross margin of like 60%, and the fact that they're doing this, like they're in a very weak position. Like what they're trying to do is capitalize as much as they can so that they can keep pushing things at scale. Because I mean, like, think about that. Like their margin is 60%. That's 60% of their costs to produce things that competition can try to undercut them by. So, like, if they don't really rake in the capital and just keep flooding things out in just raw volume of equipment, like that competition is going to come. Like 60% is fucking insane. Like, you know, when you look at like a business's profit margin, just like your typical business, 10% is good. And the fact that they have a fucking margin that high right now, that is a lot of room for competition to come in and start undercutting them on price after they go through initial development and tinkering and just like really start eating up a piece of the pie. And like that can run down a lot more before it's just not practical to like play the undercutting and price game anymore. And like they're like, in my opinion, they're just fucking scrambling to raise as much capital as they can to try to offset the inevitability of people doing that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've heard it discussed as far as like, you know, they came into the space with no competition. They build these loud, hot miners and no real customer service, not much so to speak of. And these new guys coming in with GMO and the way that they're already sort of doing the customer service and, you know, the way that they're putting things together to think about the consumer and have these sort of networks already in place to where they can build things like that and have the support there for the people that are purchasing these things. So it is one of those where they are far behind on that end. It does seem like they've just been pushing because they know that they don't have competition. And so now that this competition is here, it is kind of a run for how do we stay competitive in Bitcoin. So yeah, that's a great point.
All right, though. What's going on with Lightning?
Yeah, man. You know, that's going on over there in the whole fundraising side of things. Let's get back into some tech developments. Zap, we got a new post from Jack Mahlers over there about a big update there with the Zap Wallet. They put out a new Zap desktop release, which is cross-platform for Windows, Linux, and Mac, which finally get to see some Windows on there. Zap iOS alpha release and a new GitHub repository with some tutorials and a series of video tutorials on how to set things up and an update on the plan for the future, which is really awesome to look at. So let's just do a real quick on the Zap desktop is running LND 0.0.4.2 with a complete redesign and a new onboarding process, as well as some autopilot configuration, which is really interesting. If you watch those video tutorials, you could see how that's set up, and the remote node connection, and you can break up the denominations between Bitcoin, bits, and Satoshis. And also really good development is the integration of BTC Pay. I think that's going to be huge when we're talking about retail side of things and getting just basically the infrastructure in place to where once these things are fully developed, it'll be really ready to turn key, and there's for a reason there, which we'll get into. So this Zap desktop is configured to testnet, because as much as like this is a release, this is still, Lightning development is still coming out of the woodwork. So this is to help find bugs, and so try and work there on testnet. But it is open source, so you can set it to whichever node you'd like on whichever chain you'd like. So you could go to mainnet with it the same. I think that's the way they were with their previous Zap application, was it's set for testnet, but if you know what you're doing, you could get in there and fiddle with it to go to mainnet. So, sorry. This Zap desktop, I was watching them set up, you get like a username and a password. It's kind of like more of something to where, like, the user experience is very much brought into this as far as what people feel comfortable with whenever they're setting up something that has to deal with, transferring value and everything like that. So, you can connect to a remote Lightning node, or, you could connect to a remote Lightning node, or you could set up this autopilot, which sort of automatically puts a network manager there to where, it sort of routes the channels for you to where you don't have to set that up as far as opening a channel and everything like that. So that would be very helpful as well for user experience and people, getting on this net and not having to worry about opening channels. They could just go for it and start moving forward with the retail side of things. But before we get there, let's talk about Zap iOS real quick. They got an alpha release, which is strictly for testnet right now. They decided to disable L&D on the device for this release, as they don't feel things are quite stable yet. It's the way they want it. And however, they did, the same thing is create a way for you to connect to a remote node, and you can pick which chain you want to use. So you can, move over there to mainnet if you'd like, but that is for technical people only. Like, don't be doing that if you're just fiddling around with this stuff for the first time. So yeah, they're both sort of set to testnet, but they're free and open source. And that was a big news not too long ago. We saw Zap iOS, and that being a part of the Play Store coming up. So that's I guess the iOS store. I'm not sure what store that's called. I guess it's iTunes. So let's get into this plans for the future thing, which is really interesting. When we start talking about, they're making it for user experience, and the user interface pretty easy for anybody to sort of just onboard and start working. So they have that Zap point of sale that they're putting together, which the Zap point of sale is, I'm sorry, let me see where I put this. Okay, so the Zap point of sale right now is just, it's an application to where people can easily set up on like a tablet and in a web browser to where they could start using Zap through there. So, you see a lot of people with Square just on a tablet, and they spin it around and people are operating it. So this point of sale is going to be, I guess, configured similarly to where it's just a real basic rundown of the options that you have available to sell, and you can pin them up real quick with however you do the taxes or whatever you need to do as far as the totaling out the transaction and then charging it through Lightning. So the Zap point of sale with the Zap BTC Pay server, they hired Nicholas Dorier and Rockstar Dev of BTC Pay, and they're really going to try to combine their efforts to deliver some of these Bitcoin merchant tools, like the best on the market, like we're saying here, as far as this point of sale and the desktop app and the iOS all trying to be as user-friendly as possible. And that's important. And, Jack says in there, like, why this is important to him and what he's factoring in development, as far as like making sure it's the easiest thing for, he thinks about it from a user's perspective mainly. And that's really good whenever we're talking about, employees coming in, they just hired, they're working with this new system. It's got to be fairly easy for them. They can't be going through a long education process to try and start operating a point of sale and taking some Lightning Network transactions. So the Zap Commerce will allow merchants to create and manage their stores and, their products, their view payments, balances, leverage e-commerce plugins that BTC Pay supports, and they're exploring building a Zap Ingencio application as well, which I guess has to do with this. Ingencio has to do with this BTC to fiat conversions, which I think is really interesting because it really does take a large network on the ground as far as, Jack, he's spoken with exchanges and OTC desk and, just making sure that the liquidity's there to where they could build this system to where if the merchant wants to exchange their Bitcoin to fiat, they could do that instantly, or they could convert half and half, or they could wait until the price is going down and then it converts. That's one of the major things we do see with merchants and Bitcoin adoption is, well, the volatility. Well, Lightning helps with that because the transactions are so fast that you can pretty much assure that the price it is now, and when you receive the transaction, it's going to be pretty much the same price. So with that and the right amount of liquidity and networks in place, I guess you could create this Ingencio application, which I'm kind of theorizing that's what this is. But that's another great thing. And, he actually talks about how, there's some situations here in Boulder, Colorado, where he mentions like that there's a cannabis dispensary where there is a high dollar amount on security and cash you have to keep on hand, which makes you got to have added security. You got to build these big vaults. You got to have these big safes. You got to have Brinks trucks moving the cash around. You've got large transaction fees when it comes to Visa or any ATMs around the area that you might need to use to get the cash. So it's a huge hindrance. I can tell you from experience that when you go to the dispensary, you better be factoring in like just those fees, because they could quickly add up to an extra $5 or so, which I'm always watching my wallet. So that's one of those things where when that is available, that's going to be great. And that's something where we have been talking on the ground. I've been talking to all these different people too, and they're excited. And it's one of those things where there's like a buzz in the air. It really is. It's one of those things where it feels like this is the ground floor for something big here, as far as like creating a retail point of sale that's needed for censorship resistance, to also give a good example of how this saves the consumer and the merchant money. So I think it's going to be big when we can construct the whole thing out and actually point to it as a great example of what Bitcoin's purpose is and how exactly it's going to be used in the future. And it's going to be amazing development to follow along. And, I'm going to be working a little bit on this Zap desktop that I can put here on my desktop. And I was even thinking about maybe buying an old iPhone to fiddle around with that Zap iOS. And it's because these things are going to be very important. And I know that it's one of those things where it's like kind of all under the wheelhouse of Zap for right now, because we do have to develop this infrastructure, but it is open source and anybody can jump in there and try and, host it themselves, like he says right there. So very interesting developments with Zap and just retail adoption and what's going on with these Lightning wallets and how they're going to, work together with a point of sale and these retail merchants. It's it's not just a gas station. This is something where censorship resistance is really needed. And, it's going to be a fascinating development to just keep following along. I'm really excited about this. And, please, if you're out there and you got some extra time and you want to download some of this and help run through some of the bugs and help develop this, it's going to be very useful in the future, here in the near future. So interesting development there with Zap and Lightning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that last mile where the users actually interact with shit is like some of the most critical stuff, aside from the actual back end working. And I'm just fucking psyched to see somebody like Jack actually diving into like the whole picture as far as like that end of things, like home use, mobile use, the retailer side of things. Like he is building out that whole last mile.
Yeah, and I'm also, because I'm happy that he's able to work on the wallet at all, because he had an accident a few months back and he had to take a break and not work on it. So it's good that he's back and okay and able to contribute to so much to Bitcoin.
Yeah, man, they just kicked that brain into overdrive whenever he hit the ground because, yeah, this is a huge development. It's definitely not something where he's just been sitting around in a bed. And, yeah, it is good to see him working on it and getting these posts out. And like you're saying, just seeing the bigger picture of things. It really is one of those where it's like, can you be in the right place at the right point in time and have the right environment around you to where you could see the need and then like how can you technically build it? You got to have the foresight of that, and then also just that network in place to where you can actually make things happen. And he's in a real unique position there, and I think he's making full force of it. That's like he's running with it, and I think that we're going to make some huge strides in development just because people are seeing the road in front of them and the way that it's needed. That's something that not that many people see. I wish more people could see it, but it's one of those things where it's a perspective issue, and a lot of people's perspectives are drawn through long periods of time and their experiences. So it's a great thing to see him just taking his experiences and knowing what the foresight is on how to move forward and just running with it. Great job, Jack.
Mm-hmm. And remember to wear a helmet, Jack. That brain is important.
I know he'll be wearing that beanie then.
All right, though. Got 2 updates coming out of China. First one is an update on the flood that happened in Sichuan that was being tossed around as evidence of mining centralization, with insane claims of 30% of the network hash rate being destroyed and magically popping back out of thin air. So it's really kind of an in-depth breakdown. This CCN article kind of just summarizes a more in-depth report published out of China, which is linked at the bottom if anybody really wants to read the original source. But pretty much this is still kind of making some of the same claims that there are around 70% of the total hash rate in China, and out of that 70% of the hash rate in China in Sichuan. And the estimates kind of put around 25,000 people kind of living in this area that's really heavily used for mining. And they reached out to a man named Li Yang, who's one of the guys who operates a mining farm there. And pretty much the way he describes it is like there's literally nothing to do except monitor, the mining equipment, and then just talk to people on WeChat and play games. I mean, a direct quote from him was, "Do you know what I am afraid most of? It's a power outage and the loneliness." Just because this region is very heavily isolated, kind of in the central south area of China. And part of the reason it's attracted as much hash rate as it has is that the electricity rates are 3 times less than the national average in China. So it's really just been the perfect place in terms of electricity price for a lot of miners to go set up. But in the wake of the flooding, though, apparently a large number of big mining operations kind of, according to Lee, swooped in and were just buying up damaged mining equipment for $7 and some change per unit. So I'm not exactly sure what the plan was there, except potentially see how much of the equipment was salvageable. But in this breakdown, it's a lot more in depth than the initial stories. The estimate of mining rigs lost in the flood is 20,000 units. And so to kind of put that in perspective with the claims of 30% of the network's hash rate being destroyed, 20,000 miners, assuming they're S9s, that's literally 0.5% of the entire network's hash rate. So I mean, the estimates as far as how much mining equipment was destroyed are just inflated beyond batshit insane. like that hash rate is just a blip in the radar that would not create any kind of noticeable difference in block times, block intervals, like the security of the network. So I mean, that the way this story was initially put out was just clearly like wildly hyperbolic, and just it's people just pushing FUD that really had absolutely no basis in fact, like we thought when we first covered this. But the kind of, the last bit here is just like Lee talking about, a lot of miners in this area kind of really just being pushed out by larger farms because, excuse me, pardon me. But yeah, a lot of the people mining in this region pretty much like are doing so at like the behest of like backers. So like a lot of them are kind of going around, seeking fundraisers or loans from a lot more capitalized people, and then pretty much getting into like a profit sharing arrangement with the people bankrolling things. And just like, especially after this flood and just, the mining farms really kicking up in the economies of scale, it's really pushing out a lot of these miners in this region. And to kind of like segue into the next story, it really sucks because a lot of these miners are pretty much looking to move their operations from Sichuan to Xinjiang. And that region in China right now is really getting squeezed hard. It's pretty much an autonomous zone in the northwest of the country. And autonomous zones, if you're not too familiar with that, are pretty much areas with a little bit more legislative freedom and kind of not as tightly controlled by the Communist Party as the non-autonomous regions in China. But the Economic Information Commission in the region is really starting to clamp down on mining in the area and has recently started issuing letters to local power authorities kind of demanding that they really get serious about looking for mining operations that are not legally registered and incorporated, mining operations that don't have legal contracts with power authorities in the area for their electrical consumption. And like pretty much they put it to the point where they're demanding progress reports by the end of August, and they will start holding the utility companies in the local regions legally responsible if they pretty much failed to like take action and start shutting down some of these mining operations. And so it really sucks from the point of view of some of these miners in Sichuan looking to move to this region. Like that is not going to be a viable place for them to move. And China, it just seems like they're really tightening the noose in terms of trying to round up miners that are kind of skirting regulations and just continuing to move towards the initial like plan that they set out earlier at the beginning of this year to just try to nudge miners out of the country completely. And I mean, like a person reached out for this article, Scott Meng. He's a miner in Canada. Pretty much said like he has two partners in Xinjiang with like 18,000 miners and another with 40. And they're pretty much calling him freaking out, like trying to find locations and access to power in China to move their equipment. And I mean, like I think over the next year or so, like things are just going to keep getting progressively worse and worse as far as miners with their operations set up in China. And one thing I do want to point out at the last little comment on this story is Bitmain in the later part of 2016 was looking at setting up mining operations in Xinjiang. And I think this is probably one of the areas. A lot of rumors were going around last year of Bitmain having farms shut down and being hassled by the Communist Party in China. And I would bet my money that their attempts to expand in this region were probably where they were running into a lot of problems. Because to my knowledge, most of their other operations are kind of set up in Inner Mongolia.
Yeah, I guess the days of just like dropping a mining farm into an area where there's cheap electricity without really consulting the local governments and everything is kind of over. It's gotten to that point where things are just so big that you have articles talking about, you know, just that information as far as energy consumption and what this energy is being used for, and just all sorts of information out there that's keeping the public eye on these things to where if there is a big operation being set up, they're kind of in the know as far as, there's going to be an added cost to maybe the environment or our own electricity. And then you start to see all these, frameworks coming up for applications like we've seen in Quebec that have these guys maybe running towards a different area. And, we saw recently this guy bought this place in Colorado Springs with, you know, two substations and a lot of extra space that he wasn't actually going to be building. The miners, I think, was just a small portion of the space when really a large portion of the space was going to be used to rent out to other mining people. And I'm sure you might be seeing some business along those lines with guys like this getting pushed out of areas. But it's something that I guess I really kind of expected. Eventually, we were talking about how these places way out in Mongolia and other places where there's not really that much oversight as far as electricity and the way that it's being consumed. I think those days are kind of numbered. And I don't know. It's one of those things where I kind of we've always thought about, well, it would kind of equalize the cost of electricity on some of these areas where it's really cheap and some of the areas where it's expensive. But the way these regulatory frameworks get handed down, maybe we're going to enter a weird time period where it's like it's not necessarily the cheapest, but it's as far as it factors in the public and the environment and the regulation that might come with setting up shop there. So, yeah.
I mean, it really sucks for miners operating in China, but like speaking from the perspective of just the network as a whole, I mean, I can't say it's a bad thing in the bigger picture to see the Chinese government pushing miners out of the country. I mean, it really is going to force a much more balanced geographic distribution and just likely, I hope, at least in terms of hash rate migrating out of China, maybe an attempt to really take their own hardware, like each individual miner, and spread that a little more widely among different jurisdictions after they've kind of felt the actual effects of a jurisdiction cracking down on their operations, and maybe trying to hedge their bets a little more instead of just jumping everything into one more jurisdiction and then being at the whims of like another single government in terms of whether their operations are going to be allowed to continue or not.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to go about it too. You just already have it set up to where, if something goes unfavorable in this jurisdiction, well, we've already sort of set up over here. We could just move things around. But it's definitely feels like a different game as far as, just go to where the cheap electricity is. There's a little bit more you should be factoring in now.
Mm-hmm. All right. So next up, update from the G20. So anybody who's been following our coverage of this over the last 6 months or so will know that they've pretty much been trying to broach talks among all the member nations as far as establishing some kind of cohesive for anti-money laundering regulations and trying to get some kind of consistent approach applied globally, as opposed to just kind of leaving things right now in the hands of each individual jurisdiction. But there's going to be another meeting coming up soon, and then there is a attempt to kind of set a deadline in October to really come up with a kind of formalized binding standard on things. And the Financial Action Task Force, kind of an agency dealing with the Financial Stability Board under the G20, recently contributed to a report released by the FSB, and pretty much kind of just looking at metrics as far as like how they can assess the overall cryptocurrency ecosystem, and things they can look at as far as how serious the perceived threats they would want to deal with are. And so pretty much what they've been doing is looking at a few different metrics. Acronyms. The Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructure has been working with the FSB to look at different metrics as far as like the market stability as a whole, and kind of looking at the effects, particularly in terms of payments and innovations in that area and how they could affect banks offering similar products. The International Organization of Securities Commissions has been looking into ICOs and kind of trying to gather experiences from different members, jurisdictions, and set together like a kind of a common, a common bullet point list of different issues that jurisdictions are going to have to deal with in terms of consumer protection, different issues like whether they be local to the jurisdiction or maybe cross jurisdiction issues that are going to come up because of the international nature of an ICO. Like there's no real feasible way to stop people from other countries investing in something, and that just brings up kind of the whole bag of like international issues. Like there's not really much you can do unless everybody's on board. And then the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision has been looking at the pretty much the exposure of banks and financial institutions in terms of the risks that imposes or creates for the stability of those institutions as a whole. And pretty much it's just like a little 6-7 page report kind of breaking down the summaries by each of the constituent agencies that contributed to this paper. And one of the things that's consistently pointed out in pretty much each of the sections by all of the agencies is the lack of information that they're able to get. Like if you can see here, looking at the market capitalization and the price volatility are two of the things that the CPMI was pretty much looking at. And they're pretty much just pulling things off CoinMarketCap. Like an international regulatory agency is looking to a random website ran by a random person that really has no kind of hygiene or standards for where they're pulling their data from. And we can see this looking back at the history of this site, like how many times some random shitcoin popped up to the number one spot because of a price fluctuation on almost no volume. The fact that right now they're in the middle of kind of looking through how they actually display their information and trying to kind of filter out low volume, like false signals to have more accurate representations. And I mean, it's really kind of fucking absurd at this point that an international organization like this is literally looking to a website ran by some random person in the cryptocurrency space, trying to gather information to really inform the policy decisions they're making. And then it's pretty much like you can look through each of these sections and really see most of it is kind of citing past works or papers that each of these agencies has published on the different areas that they're covering. And really the gist of it at the end here is a table they've set up of the metrics. So they're pretty much looking at, firstly, primary risks and basic market information. So like the capitalization, price levels, volatility. And they're gathering most of these bits of information from the Bank of International Settlements and the International Monetary Fund. So I would not really bank on that being very comprehensive or accurate information for the most part. Confidence effects, so pretty much how those previous metrics can really inform the attitude of investors in this space and how those things can feed back from themselves, which is being gathered by the FSB. So again, I would not bet that being very accurate information. It's pretty much a bunch of bureaucratic stooges sitting around and trying to guess what is going through the head of crypto traders and advocates. don't see that being a very accurate qualitative assessment. Then the wealth effects and market capitalization, again, broken down a little more. This, I think, is something they might have a little more ability to get some accurate information, both sourced from the Bank of International Settlements. Looking at, in terms of market capitalization, the size and rate of growth, the number of ICOs being issued, and then the inflows and outflows of different fiat currencies. And so these kinds of metrics, I think that they will get a pretty accurate picture of, because this is data you can gather from different exchanges, which are likely, in my opinion, to kind of cooperate in giving like scrubbed anonymous metrics for this. And then, of course, banks that are actually handling wires in and out of these exchanges. And then price levels, volatility, rate of growth, which again, like this is all things that are available just publicly, looking at order books and data feeds, like especially Blockstream's ICE feed that's being distributed by one of the biggest exchanges in the world. So this area, I think they'll get a decent amount of accurate information from. And then in terms of institutional exposures, the derivative trading volumes, price level, and open interests, the groups that are involved in clearing these kinds of products, and then the levels of margin, and as well as pretty much, again, market capitalization and the exposure of different banks. So again, something I think that they'll be able to get a decent amount of wide metrics on. And then pretty much their use in payments and settlements, and comparisons in the volatility of different asset classes. So pretty much just looking how disconnected or correlated they are with things like gold, other currencies, and the equities markets. And for the most part, I think they'll be able to gather some decent information from there. But as of right now, they're pretty much just kind of making a loose proposal for how to handle the anti-money laundering aspect of things, and then just watching all of these metrics to kind of decide when they should bring things back to the table and how they want to handle things internationally.
Yeah, I just see the well, I was going to say, man, like this G20 AML stuff, like, yeah, it's kind of a pretty big joke to see them using CoinMarketCap, and I guess they were also using blockchain.info as their main two sources of information. And yeah, if there's ever a sign that people need to be properly educated and we need to have some more resources out there, it's a pretty good one. But I think we have started to see kind of like people sort of falling in line to the idea that this might come down. I mean, we've seen just more exchanges sort of posturing as far as like, we are going to have to get KYC from these customers, and without that, then we can't take your trades anymore. And just maybe that's just sort of moving in towards what they're hearing behind the scenes. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of I don't know, it's one of those things where money laundering, a lot of people wonder whether or not it should even be illegal. And then just like the amount of money laundering that's going on within the current financial system, it's and then you look at the information that they're getting, it's I don't know, it's like, what are they really talking about? I don't even think they know. So we'll see what they have to say in the future about all this.
Mm-hmm. And then another short update. 12 of the 15 federators of Liquid have initialized their boxes. So 3 more people to come online, and then Liquid will actually be live. So I think this is going to be pretty interesting to see how fast liquidity starts building up in the chain. And really, like, I want to see how much of an effect this really starts having in terms of price disparity between different exchanges, and how quickly traders start using this for arbitrage trades. And importantly, I want to see how quick it takes for stable coins to start moving in and out of this, because you fill in both of those sides, and this is going to start eating the arbitrage opportunities in this space alive, at least between member exchanges. This is going to be pretty awesome when this fucking launches.
Yeah, super excited for Liquid. It's just one of those things where, you know, exchanges have been working with what they have, and we understand that. And, you know, it'd be good to just have something out there that's another product for them to do this sort of thing. That way, if there's an error with one, there's got a backup, or, you know, maybe this one's a little bit more solid than that one. So it's going to be interesting to see. It's moving along a lot faster than I thought. And it's kind of the way, I don't know, things have been moving this year. Things have been moving fast. And I don't know, I feel like we're kind of above my estimations as to where I thought we'd be in the middle of the year.
Mm-hmm. And then another shitty update. Mike Olthoff, founder, I believe, of Coin Cards in Canada. It's a business selling gift cards for Bitcoin. Pretty much 2 days ago, I think. Yeah, 2 days ago right now. Made a tweet saying that the number of people who are sending them Bcash under the assumption that it's actually Bitcoin has been growing a lot lately in this business. And I mean, like this, like really, I'm just getting sick of this shit. I mean, like it is an altcoin. It is a spin-off of Bitcoin. It is not Bitcoin. Like, just accept that, acknowledge it, move on, and compete with your product. Because like this is not like avid supporters of different things, like just arguing over which is superior. Like this is literally people being scammed. This is people being lied to and told that one financial asset, which is valued at, like, I think now less than a tenth or around there of the actual asset, and being defrauded. And now dealing with the complications spilling over to an actual business, who, when these people attempt to spend something at this business, thinking it is another financial asset, this business now has to waste time if they don't want to just be pretty much a dick about it and just go, you lost money, I'm sorry. They now have to go through the hassle of importing keys, refunding these people their money, and breaking it to them that you were pretty much lied to. So like this kind of shit, it's like this is disgusting. Like this is not like we have a superior product, use this instead. This is outright lying to people coming into this space with no sense of the history, no foreknowledge of what's actually going on, and defrauding them. Like if you think that Bitcoin Cash is a superior thing, then tell them what it is and explain why you think it is superior. Like defrauding people, claiming that this asset is something that it is not, is fucking despicable. And I mean, at the end of the day, if this continues, I fully expect somebody to get sued over this. Like point blank. Like you sending somebody BCH and claiming it is Bitcoin, that's fraud. There are a litany in almost every Western country of laws that specifically cover misrepresenting financial assets to somebody. And I mean, I'm fucking sick of seeing shit like this. If you want to compete, then be open, be honest, and make your arguments and compete. Stop trying to fucking lie, mislead, and defraud people.
Is the story about Roger Ver threatening a Swiss business in the news desk? Because I don't want to spoil that if that's coming up.
No, it wasn't.
So, yeah, related to this story, I can't remember the name of it, but I could probably look it up really quick. There was some kind of... Yeah, probably. There was a Swiss company who apparently they were listed on Bitcoin.com somewhere under the exchange section, maybe. And they have stopped accepting Bitcoin Cash. And Roger or someone at Bitcoin.com sent them an email saying, like, if you do not, start accepting Bitcoin Cash, we're going to remove you from our website. And their response was, well, I mean, that's a shame, but literally there's no reason for us to accept Bitcoin Cash because there is literally no market for it in Switzerland. Like, there are not enough users. There are no businesses who are adopting it for retail. No one is using it. Why would we, why would we make all this extra effort to add it as something that we support? It doesn't make sense from a business perspective. So, that's probably those kinds of statements are going to happen increasingly often because, maybe there were some businesses who were like, yeah, we're going to accept Bitcoin Cash because, I don't know, they either got paid to accept it or they thought maybe that there was some undercurrent of users that were dissatisfied with Bitcoin and we're going to use Bitcoin Cash. But at the end of the day, there's basically a very small group of people that are using it. You can tell because the number of transactions that are happening like per hour, per day, extremely small. The block size is extremely small, they're in kilobytes. When you go to block explorers and you look at the block space, it's measured in kilobytes when you're looking at Bitcoin Cash. They're not even talking about megabytes here. So yeah, there's no market for it. So if their response is to start threatening companies, we're going to delist you from our website because you're not accepting our coin. It's like, well, to be honest, you're probably putting out a bunch of disinformation anyway. We don't really want to be associated with you. So it's not really much of a loss, is it?
Yeah, I think I've only seen a couple of tumbleweeds move down that Bcash transaction highway, but it's definitely super aggravating to see this. Like, I'm feel your frustration there, because it is like one of those where I'm like trying to educate people and bring them into the space the right way, and it is very much a hold their hand process throughout this, and because there's a lot of errors that you can make along the way, and this is becoming a more repetitive error as like more people are coming into the space, and they go to the .com or the .org, and they just run into a piece of information and they run with it. And it's just, once they get scammed, like, the reason why I take the time with that is because I know once that person figures it out, they're going to go tell their friends about how they figured it out, or they're going to talk about how it's been a positive experience for them. And whenever one of these guys gets scammed, then, they're going to be talking with their friends about how, yeah, it's a scam. And this whole situation on that Bcash side, like, not only is it, not really being used. I mean, like, there's a reason why businesses shouldn't accept it, because it's causing all this confusion. I mean, if you say you're going to accept it, then that gives them a reason to continue trying to push this narrative. And as we've seen, like I've been saying earlier, is there's this whole infighting within the community as far as whether they should be going with what Craig Wright's doing or with what Bitmain's doing. And what's going to happen at that point? You're going to have more people saying, well, this is Bitcoin BCSW. No, this is Bitcoin BCH. No, this is Bitcoin BTC. To what end? Like, eventually, like, this has just we got to figure out a way to get these guys to, I mean, like, maybe you're right. Maybe a lawsuit is inevitable and that eventually it will get handed down and things will go the right way. But I mean, it's causing a lot of damage as far as, people getting hurt whenever they're getting into the space. And that's like one of the worst spots to hit, because what happens to them, their friends will hear about it. Their friends and family will hear about it. And then that's going to slow the adoption of them trying to get into it. And it's one of those things where it's a terrible feedback loop that we got to get rid of for sure.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like, it's going to happen. I mean, you demonstrate a material loss as a result of somebody misrepresenting thing, and it's fraud. Like, there is literally black and white laws for that in almost every Western country. And I mean, if this kind of shit continues, it's like, that's it. Like, seriously, just stop being manipulative shitbags and just be honest. You forked away from Bitcoin because you did not agree what it was doing, and you now have an altcoin derived from Bitcoin. Explain it, be honest, and make your case for it. And if you're not doing that, then you are defrauding people. and it will come back and bite you in the ass. It will come back reputationally. It eventually will come back financially, but it will.
Hopefully
right.
soon.
Second to last story, just a rundown from the Coin Center posted this based on the two hearings that happened last week. The Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, has reiterated that they are not seeking, they being the Federal Reserve, to attempt to regulate or interfere with the development of cryptocurrencies at this time. And pretty much, in his words, they currently exist in a small experimental corner of the world's financial markets and are therefore unable to restrain central banks' monetary policy levers. And so, pretty much explicitly, despite all of the nonsense and insanity in that hearing, it's the one thing that's important to take away is the Fed is going to continue to just stay back and kind of let things play out how they're going to play out and not attempt to assert any kind of influence or control over the space right now. All right, and sorry, poop Janine. Janine had to run. There she goes.
Yeah, that's yeah. Unfortunately, Janine's got to run. She's got some business to take care of. But yeah, that's good to see the Fed are saying at least that they're going to stay hands off, because it's one of those things where I don't know how much that really they could affect things other than saying like, we want you to use this thing, and I don't know how effective that would be anyway. So yeah, it's a good thing I think that they're saying hands off for now.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, like, what are they going to do? Like, cut down exchanges? People will route around that. They don't have jurisdictional control over the entire world. I mean, it's inevitable. And I mean, there's really nothing they can do about it except just delay the inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a couple of reports from what was it, was the European Union, I think, that put together that report about how like the idea of issuing a Fed coin wasn't that great of an idea. There's been some, just some talk within, these upper echelons of central banks talking about how it wouldn't really be that good of an idea. So I guess they're listening to that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's something that's really like a pretty prevalent attitude at this point with central banks, and like they're starting to realize that like it's you fuck with the entire dynamic of how like debt is issued and money's created. Like you become a direct competitor to private businesses performing those things, and it's just a mess. Like it would completely destabilize the entire economy. And I mean, if you look at America, like the finance sector is one of the biggest areas of our economy. So like a central bank stepping in and attempting to kind of directly compete with them with a government monopoly and a leg up, like it's that would just, it would destroy the entire economy. But
yeah, it's not it.
mm-hmm. Sad Janine is not here to get a few licks in, but you're ready for the punching bag? Let's go.
Oh no.
All right.
Oh no.
Coinbase, the biggest U.S. cryptocurrency exchange, launched an inquiry last December into whether its employees engaged in improper trading related to the digital currency known as Bitcoin Cash. Now, Fortune has learned the company has wrapped up the investigation and concluded no wrongdoing took place. Bullshit! 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 You want to know how I know it's bullshit? I personally know somebody who traded on insider information and bought 24 hours before their listing was announced. You know how she knew about it? She was in a pump and dump group on fucking Discord where they were telling the entire pump and dump group, we know it's going to happen. Coinbase is going to list it by now. Hundreds of people being told 24 hours before the listing was publicly announced, it's going to happen. Buy Bitcoin Cash. So Coinbase, Brian Armstrong, you are completely, utterly full of fucking shit. And I have direct firsthand knowledge that you are completely full of shit. And I'm sure that there are hundreds and hundreds of people out there that also have that same firsthand knowledge. So let's all give a round of applause for Coinbase, the biggest full of shit company in the entire cryptocurrency ecosystem.
Yeah, well, you know, just following up on that same sort of method from previous companies and traditional way of doing things is just investigate yourself and you didn't find anything wrong. And yeah, it's pretty absurd. I mean, for anything, for anything to be taken seriously, you should have at least some third party come in and investigate this sort of stuff. But we know they're not interested in cleaning up their house on anything like that. Like they sort of made their bed and they're going to ride it into the ground, however long that takes. And you know, that's Conbase. I don't know. This is why we always bring them up as the punching bag, because I mean, we haven't really seen any developments in a positive direction since really the integration of SEG. I mean, like they started batching, but only after it was pointed out, and they did adopt SegWit addresses, but like only after they were the last exchange to do it. I mean, they've been dragging their heels, and they're sort of set in their ways. So yeah, I don't know how much longer they're going to be. I mean, I suppose they'll be relevant for a while, but they're certainly not doing anything to remain relevant in the long term. So Conbase, continuing being Conbase.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I guess that takes us to final thoughts. And I am going to load up the final thoughts of Janine.
Yeah,
Never
give us some thoughts. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Never, ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer consequences the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. Is typed over a meme of Trump yelling at a little boy mowing a lawn.
I'm so out of mainstream when I saw this. I was like, oh, Trump's making his kid cut the White House lawn. That's pretty interesting. But no, that's not the case. You dig into it a minute, and of course, Trump went off on some Iran thing where I guess they said something about you shouldn't grab the lion's tail or something. And then Trump just went off talking about how, yeah, don't threaten America because this America will kick your butt. So in all caps.
No, he's stop with your logic audio video tweaker. He's yelling because he's being an asshole. It has nothing to do with the lawnmower being loud. Okay, stop your distortion of reality, buddy.
Jesus, audio. That's a funny joke there. I can't even say it.
All right, and now this last one I feel weird about because her second final thought is a tweet of mine. But here's Cointelegraph, one of the biggest rags in this entire ecosystem, trying to make a Matrix reference, trying to get people to try and get a job at Cointelegraph. Except, hey, the dumbasses completely fucked up. Why is Bitcoin the blue pill and the US dollar the red pill? They got that completely backwards there. It's almost like they have no concept of red pilling or have ever seen The Matrix.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like this was one of those things where when I saw it, I saw you tweet about it. It's like, God, that is ridiculous. How do you get that wrong? I don't know. I mean, like I guess they just didn't watch The Matrix or they don't understand the red pill, blue pill thing. But maybe they're going in some weird direction, right? Whereas Cointelegraph, they're like the red pill, you continue the simulation and you do this. The blue pill, you do the other thing. I don't know. Maybe they're just confusing reality and simulation. I don't know.
They're just idiots. Like this Cointelegraph is a joke. Their articles are jokes. I want to vomit inside every time I've ever put them on the show because they're the only thing mentioning something. There's no substance. I cannot count the number of people I know in the space they've approached privately and offered to pay them to retweet their fucking shit rag. Like this is the worst like news outlet in this space. Like period.
Yeah, it's I don't know. The picture that's pretty bad, but yeah, their articles have been pretty bad too. So Cointelegraph, man. Let's get with it.
And then Janine's last thought is Mesa Time was asking JW some advice on key management, and to just be blunt, he is the last person in the world anybody should be asking about that. So his concern was how to be sure that the seed generated by a hardware wallet isn't predetermined or backdoored. And so Janine has a bunch of resources if you're worried about this, to be able to verify firmware on the Trezor. And the Ledger's SGX secure element is not open source, but they do have some tools that allow you to verify it's operating properly if you trust that. And here's a video posted up on Andreas Antonopoulos' channel, just in general about key storage methods. So anybody who's kind of looking for information on that, we're still kind of working to get a ZK Snacks together on the issue. I'm not really sure how long that'll take, but in the meantime, there's some resources for everybody to check out.
Yeah, that's a good update. It's one of those things where it's kind of upsetting to see, JW's talked with some real confidence there, and I guess that served him well for quite some time. But I don't know, JW, you running off, jumping down this rabbit hole of knowing everything. It's not the right way to do it, man. You gotta have a little hubris in here and sort of step back and relearn some things. And the hardware wallet situation is something you should definitely look into a little bit more, because I've just been hearing a little bit of the misunderstandings myself, and don't run down the wrong hole because that you picked the right one at the beginning. Like kind of step back and look at it again.
All right. Got any final thoughts for us, Rick, before I end us off with a meme?
I'll give this final thought real quick. But from the troll box, Audio Tweaker said something after the Zap story that I thought, I've heard this, even Sybil talk about this in the Mumble, but there's this field as far as like this whole Lightning Network development goes, and making the user experience a little bit more easy, and having this onboarding process be relatively easy, and just like that could be a service, and that's something that if you're wondering what you could do, and like you're tinkering around with some of these Lightning nodes and some of the software, then it's not a bad idea to kind of try and package that together and try and help some local businesses in your area start accepting Lightning payments, and try and expand this thing out further than I'm even seeing it. I mean, it's definitely something where if you're looking for something to do, that's going to be needed. I mean, like a lot of these people, we try to educate them from the ground up, and it's hard going. Like I said, you hold their hand through this process, and it's a long process. But if there is an easier way that they could just have a little class with you, or you create a video and then you come in and help them set it up to where whenever they hire employees, it's fairly easy for them to grasp what they're doing there with that new point of sale and the retail system side of things. That's something that's going to definitely be needed, and it's a little bit of foresight there, Audio, to be looking at that. And Sybil, like I would highly recommend any of that activity if you're thinking about doing that. That's something that's going to be needed here in the near to short term. So good looking out on that, and I'm just going to give a shout out to that idea because I think it's really good. And so let's get out there and get this thing going.
All right, and final thoughts. Bitcoin Cash likes to make claims that it's the real Bitcoin. But I'd like to remind everybody, Bitcoin Cash isn't even the real Bitcoin Cash. Stay clashy, everybody.
Later, everyone. Stay clashy.